Before we get into today's video, I just wanted to announce that our new polygel collection is officially available now. It released on July 31st, so yesterday. We have 3 new polygel shades included in this collection and our new clear rubber base coat. First up is Halo Dust. This is a white polygel with a very fine shimmer in it, no chunky pieces, very smooth to apply. Then we have Moon Foam, which is a soft milky white polygel. It's very buildable and it has a very delicate look to it. And then the third polygel is Glass Current. This is our clear polygel, perfect for clear extensions or encapsulation. And then we have our clear rubber base coat. This is the base coat that I've been working on. And then I do have bundle options available with our classic polygel brush. There are various options there, individual pieces or various bundles, and then I will be showing you the collection more in depth in my next YouTube video. Shop at doperthanyournails.com. The link is in the description. Welcome back to my channel. In this week's tutorial, we are doing a step-by-step polygel tutorial, and I'll be using my non-dominant hand. This is a Colombia inspired set that I did for the World Cup, and it was really fun to do. I think it's fun for summer and just as a bright set in general, so I hope you enjoy seeing the process step by step. So let's start off with our nail prep. I am right-handed, so I'm using my left hand here, so I'm using my non-dominant hand, and this is something that a lot of people struggle with, but the process is pretty much the same. You just want to slow it down and take your time, and I'll give you tips as I go along. I think taking a little bit more time with your prep and doing an even more thorough job is more important when you are using your non-dominant hand and you're doing your nails on your dominant hand, I mean, because they will go through more wear and tear. One thing that really helps with prep is using baby powder, so I just apply it with the brush, and it really helps dry up and bring up that dead skin, and it'll be much easier to clean up when you're using your e-file. I'm using a micro taper bit here at a low speed and just further cleaning up the cuticle area. Using a light pressure, let the drill bit do the work for you, and then I'm just clipping off the excess skin that's come up. This part is optional. If you feel comfortable, you can do it, but I think definitely with the baby powder and e-file, it's very comfortable and easy to do, so try that out if you haven't before. The goal is to get the cuticle off the nail plate and just make sure the nail plate is nice and clean and dehydrated in a way, if that makes sense. Basically, if you have oils or there's anything on there that's going to make nail products not stick, that's what we are trying to avoid. So that's what this entire prep routine is aimed at doing, and that goes for whether you're doing your dominant or non-dominant hand. Using a 240 grit sanding band. This is a very fine grit sanding band, and this is the last step for prep as far as the e-file goes. I just use this along the cuticle area right there at the very top, and then I use it along the rest of the nail, just making sure that the shine is removed and any excess skin. This really polishes everything up and makes sure that the nail plate is clean, it's nicely manicured, and that you have a clean surface that your products will adhere to. So you could say it's both for aesthetic purposes and prep purposes. You can also file down your nails if you'd like to. I like keeping my natural nails short, otherwise I tend to pick at them, and so on and so forth. So now we are just sizing out our nail tips. I'm going to be doing a long stiletto nail set. I use half cover tips. I use polygel as an acrylic alternative. This nail tip is, for example, too small. If you're pressing down and the nail tip is still not meeting from side to side wall comfortably without having to apply a ton of pressure, it's too small. So this can be a source of your nails popping off, and it's especially even more important when you're doing your right hand, the hand that you use more. So I try to make sure my tips fit comfortably. If I'm in between sizes, I will size up and file down, and you will see me do that with the pinky. These nail tips are from Amazon. Recently, I have just found trying these fancier tips from like higher quality brands and stuff, they just don't stick that well. So I think a lot of times these no-name brands from Amazon, the tips tend to just work better for me and they're more sturdy. So you'll see here with the pinky, I did cut down the sides just because it is a little bit too big, but otherwise these nail tips are very sturdy. I like how the plastic feels. It doesn't feel flimsy at all. So you can check these out on Amazon, and I'll have that linked in the description. I'm using my favorite brush on glue, and I've just applied a little bit to the inside of the tip, and I'm holding down for 10 seconds, applying pressure, and then I will also pinch from the sides and on top of the nail as well, just to make sure it's secure all around. The amount of glue you use as well can also affect your nail tips and how well they stick. You actually don't want to use too much glue, so I like to concentrate more at the center and then just kind of bring it out to the sides. And then when I'm pressing down, I try to make sure I'm applying even pressure and just holding it down with enough pressure for it to be secure, but making sure the nail tip is not moving around. That can happen as well. When you apply too much glue, the nail tip will start sliding off. So I'll also get into more specific tips when using your non-dominant hand, but I will also say don't overthink it so much. Just get in the habit of doing it. I think when we put so much pressure and we kind of make it out this thing in our brain where, oh my gosh, I'm using my non-dominant hand, like this is going to be really difficult, you kind of psych yourself out. Like I think at this point where I am with my nail journey and stuff, I really don't even realize that I'm doing my non-dominant hand or using my non-dominant hand, and I think that's kind of the point you want to get to, where yeah, there might be a little bit of uncomfortableness. You might angle your hand in certain ways or take a little bit longer in certain steps, but you're not constantly thinking, oh, I'm using my non-dominant hand, like I can't mess this up. You know, your muscles will get used to it over time the more that you do it, and you will figure out techniques that work best for you. But I would say definitely the biggest thing is don't psych yourself out before you've even tried. Have confidence and use the techniques that you already do, and just let yourself kind of go with the process and practice and get used to it over time. Next, I'm going to blend my nail tips with that same 240 grit sanding band. I like to do this along the entire tip. Some techs will just do it partially, some don't do it at all, but I do feel like it makes the tip more flush and seamless before application. Especially if I ended up using a tip that's bigger like the one on the pinky. I did cut it down, but I will use my sanding band to refine it. We also need to pre-shape certain parts of the tip to make them more stiletto, which we will get to. So sometimes if this can feel a little bit uncomfortable, you can move your hand versus moving the e-file, or just use whichever position is more comfortable. Like sometimes for me, just using this up and down motion is more comfortable than side to side. And I just try to use light pressure and slow down when I get to this part when I'm blending the nail tip. You want to make sure you're keeping the sanding band on the nail tip, off the natural nail, and just make sure it's flush, but that you're not over filing. It is a plastic nail tip, so you don't want to thin it out too much. I also use it to make sure that the corners are nice and flush so that we have a seamless grid and pattern to follow for application. That's another thing that really helps with application and just aesthetics, is making your nail tip perfect before you do your application, whether that is refining the shape or just making sure the sides are tucked in and there's no like pieces of plastic sticking out, and that you have a nice transition from the free edge to the bottom of the extension. Now that we have blended the nail tips, I also want to refine the actual shape of the nail tip to be a more crisp stiletto. Even if you end up rounding out the free edge, I would recommend doing this just so the tips are narrow and more tapered. Part can definitely be a little bit awkward filing with your non-dominant hand. Also keep in mind that I'm filming, but sometimes I will just move my hand against the nail tip versus moving the file itself. But as you can see here, these specific nail tips are a little bit rounded and flare out a little bit. They don't have that perfect crisp stiletto transition from the free edge to the tip of the extension, so I just want to make sure that we have that before we do our application. I am using a 100 over 180 grit hand file and using the more coarse side, and I'm mostly focusing on the side that is more rounded out. We are definitely narrowing out the tip of the nail as well, but you want to make sure you're not filing into it too much, because it's really easy to over file and then it just messes up the stiletto nail shape and it kind of becomes uneven. We are filing against the sides leading to that tip, not on the tip itself. If you do file on that, it will round it out, or it will remove it, or just make it uneven, and you won't have that stiletto nail shape anymore. One thing that helps when filing with your non-dominant hand is just bracing your hand in a certain way to stabilize it. So I will use my thumb to stabilize against my fingers, and it just helps hold everything more still as I am filing. Pinky can definitely be the most awkward to shape, and this is the nail that needed the most filing in this case, because I did use that larger nail tip that I cut down slightly on the side, so it wasn't as even. We're done. We're dusting off with alcohol, and I'm just using acetone and these little cotton swabs to dehydrate. I haven't been using like a formal dehydrator, and this has been working fine so far. So it's literally just 100% acetone, which definitely helps dehydrate, or you can use an actual dehydrator. Once that air dries, we are applying our primer, which is Young Nails Protein Bond. I'm applying this to the natural nail. I'm definitely doing this at a slower pace than I would with the other hand, so I'm just making sure that the entire natural nail is covered without using too much product. Using too much primer can actually have the opposite effect and cause lifting. I mentioned with the nail glue, if you use too much nail glue, it can also just kind of slip right off, so use just the right amount. Now I am applying my gel base coat before polygel application, and by the time you're watching this product should be released. This is our new clear rubber base coat. Launches on July 31st, and this is the long-awaited base coat that I've been talking about for so long now, and it's very versatile. You can use it for gel extensions, you can use it as a base coat before polygel, you can use it for structured manicures. It can be used to build up structure if you're doing like overlays on natural nails, as I mentioned, with structured manicures and growing out your natural nails and things like that, or adding reinforcement reinforcement to press on, so it's very versatile and the retention is great. This formula is also HEMA and TPO free, so we will continue to try to offer a variety in formulas. But overall, the product itself is just really good. I've been testing it for a really long time and I'm very excited for it to be officially out there now. Once the gel base coat is applied and cured, we are getting our slip solution and polygel ready. I'm using 70% isopropyl alcohol and getting my polygel brush ready. This is also the polygel brush from my brand. This liquid is what helps mold your polygel and helps ensure that it's not sticking to your brush and that it's able to glide and be shaped into whatever which way you'd like with your application. So you just want to keep your brush damp enough and use enough liquid to move around the polygel without flooding the nail. For our polygel today, we are using Desert Rose Polygel. This is also from my brand. Everything will be linked in the description. You can shop at doperthanyournails.com and we do ship worldwide. This is my personal favorite base color. It is a dusty rose color and it has a nice peach undertone as well. So we are going to be using the 2-bead method with this polygel. However, even though I am showing 2 beads here, I would say use as many beads as you need, and especially when using your non-dominant hand, I would encourage you to use smaller and multiple beads in whichever way is most comfortable. Even if that's like 3 to 4 small beads, especially if you're doing longer nails, just go ahead and do that. Just make sure you're curing in between. It can be more overwhelming and less comfortable to have to apply a giant bead of polygel, even if it's like 1 to 2 beads, especially with your non-dominant hand if you're not used to it. So just break it down into smaller steps. But in this case, I have cured the first bead and now I am working on the second one, which is technically the cuticle bead, and I've placed it way below the cuticle area and I am working it towards there with light tapping motions in the corner of my brush. If thinking about polygel application in beads doesn't make sense or really work for you, you can also think about it in layers. It's just really about breaking it down into separate steps for building up the structure of the product. So I fully cured the thumb and now I am moving on to the pointer finger. So I've placed the bead where the natural nail meets the nail tip and I'm starting to flatten it out to cover the nail tip before I start gently dragging down. And you will see over time you get very comfortable doing application even with your non-dominant hand and it won't feel so intimidating. Think of the nail tip that you've already shaped and sized as your pattern or guide and you were simply making the polygel fit to that. For that first bead, I just make it flat and I'm not building up a ton of structure, just making it fit to the nail tip. And then for the second bead, I focus more so on the cuticle area and the actual apex. And I forgot to mention one really important tip before I started, which is that since we are in the summer months, it is extremely hot here in California currently. I would definitely recommend putting your polygel tube in the fridge for about 5 to 10 minutes before you use it. Like acrylic polygel is temperature dependent, so if you find your polygel is more soft or runny than usual, it is definitely because of the temperature of your workspace, and it is just that time of year that it's super warm. So just stick it in the fridge for about 5 to 10 minutes and it will bring it back to that perfect consistency. So this third nail here is a good example of adding more where you see fit even after you do your 2 beads. Since this nail is quite long, I wanted to add a little bit more structure in the apex area, so after I cured, I just went back and added a smaller bead, focusing mostly on the cuticle and apex area. In my opinion, an apex is both a little bit of a mix of a personal preference, but also you do have to keep the structure of the nail in mind, but you also don't need a mountain for your apex. It also just depends on what nail shape you're doing and the length. The thing that really helps when doing your non-dominant hand, this is just a general tip, is a lot of us tend to do one hand and skip the other. Usually we skip using our non-dominant hand, but if you actually do your non-dominant hand first, so if you're right-handed, you do your right hand first with your left hand, you're definitely not going to skip the other hand that you're used to doing. So that's kind of just like a mindset thing that helps. You do the hand that's harder first, you get it out of the way, and you get in the habit of doing it regularly. So we are on the last nail here, which is the pinky. The pinky is often one nail that I think people struggle with more just because it's smaller. You can try a smaller brush. Our art gel brush would be a great example of a smaller brush you can use for this if you feel more comfortable with that. You generally don't need as much product on the pinky because it is a smaller nail, but you still want to make sure you are building up the structure properly. I use the same technique though. I do the 2-bead method and I use the second bead to focus on the cuticle and apex area. I pat around the edges to make it flush with the cuticle, and then I just drag the rest down and make sure that the structure is to my liking. It's also good to keep in mind that when you file, that is going to take a little bit of product off, so that is just something to be mindful of as you're doing your application and deciding how much product to use. Now it's time for shaping. I've removed the sticky layer with alcohol once the polygel is fully cured, and I'm starting off with my first bit, which is a 5-in-1 bit. This is a fine grit bit that I use. You can get these on Amazon or from brands like Pana. And I use this bit to clean up around the cuticle area, and I also use it to debulk and go along the entire nail. This angle is really awkward to film at with the thumb. Usually I tilt my hand the other way, but I feel like that angle is more uncomfortable for me, so this time I dried it backwards, so just don't mind that. This is a multifunctional bit, so the tapered end helps you in the cuticle area, but then you can also use the body of the bit to just generally debulk and smooth out the rest of the nail. Use it at a lower speed of about 4 to 5 RPMs around the cuticle, and then I will bring it up to about 6 to 8 RPMs, just depending when I am getting to the rest of the nail. And depending on your comfort level, you can bring the speed down even more, especially when using your non-dominant hand, and you just want to make sure that you are stabilizing your hands in some sort of way, like I'm doing here with the thumb. I'm using this to brace my hands so that I can use the e-file more comfortably. But even then, it can be a little bit awkward at times, so this is why using a fine grit bit really helps. It's not as coarse, but it can still get the job done. I also like to use this to clean under the nail. If you feel comfortable, you can do it this way, but you definitely want to be careful not to nick or file into the sidewalls, especially with a stiletto or almond nail. Otherwise, you lose that structure and it ruins the look of it. And in the cuticle area, I try to use no pressure at all and just let the drill bit do the work for me. And I try to use more of a side to side motion versus going up and down the nail, but sometimes with your non-dominant hand, it's just more comfortable to do it this way. I just try to be mindful not to overdo it because I don't want to file away the structure or curve of the nail. I don't want to flatten the nail completely, both from an aesthetic and structural standpoint. So I'll go ahead and let the music play while you watch me finish up with the 5-in-1 bit. Now it's time for hand filing. I always like to start with a 100 over 180 grit hand file, and I use the more coarse side for the most part. This is going to be used to file the surface of the nail, and I create this guideline down the center. The area that I don't want to flatten out or over file, I want to keep that curve and that arch as part of the structure and aesthetically as well. So I will use my file to file down towards the left hand side and the right hand side, following that natural curve. Filing in this way also helps ensure that the product is thinner at the sides and that the bulk of the product is at the center. Like with the e-file, this can be a little awkward with your non-dominant hand, but you just want to angle your hand in whichever way is most comfortable. Also, just noting here that I am not filing into the sidewalls at this point. I am simply filing the surface of the nail. We will use a different file that will help us get a more crisp free edge and sidewalls once we get to that part. At this point in my tutorials, I like to show one step and one tool at a time, especially for shaping, but you could definitely group multiple steps together. Try flipping your hand around different ways. Try moving the hand against the file versus moving the file so much if you don't feel as stable or confident using your non-dominant hand with a hand file. And as you can see, there is a chalky texture that shows up once I have filed over a certain part, so I try my best not to over file or go over one part multiple times so that I am not thinning out that area too much. So you can use that as a visual indicator. Once you see that chalky texture, you know that you have filed that area, and you can move on until you see the entire nail covered in that. Sometimes I cannot help it myself and I start stacking multiple steps even though I'm filming. So like here I was like, oh, I just really want to file the sidewalls a little bit now. You can definitely use the 100 over 180 grit hand file, but I will use an 80 grit hand file to show you how to get a more crispy stiletto shape. But this is technically the next step I would do, which is filing against the sidewalls to make sure they're nice and straight and narrow and coming down to the free edge in a crisp line. Once you get more advanced or comfortable, you can definitely go back and forth between certain steps. So in this case, I filed a little bit of the sidewalls and then went back over the actual surface of the nail. We're moving on to the third nail, so I've already filed most of the surface, and I'm just continuing to use that curved motion and analyzing from the sides as well as I continue to file. Especially at the free edge, you want it to be more thin and you don't want to have too much product there. If there's too much product at the free edge, that is what can give it that bulky shape. So it is a balance between making sure you don't have too much product there, but also not thinning it out too much. But honestly, if your structure is on point, there is nothing wrong with having the free edge super thin, which is definitely how I like it, which is what gives you that more crispy shape. Continuing to show you how I brace my hands. I mean, sometimes you literally have to hold your own hands like this, especially with the ring finger and especially with the pinky. I have to brace it even more because you can definitely feel the pressure there. So in this case, I'm literally bracing it against the thumb and using that to help stabilize as I file the sides. I know sometimes I've seen artists put their hands down on some sort of surface while they file, but I'm also doing this to make sure that I am able to film and everyone can see what I'm doing. So this is how you can hold your pinky while you're filing to make it more comfortable. Now I'm using an 80 grit hand file. This is a more coarse file, which is why I don't use it on the surface of the nail because it can file away more product, but some like that. If you feel like you like that look or you want to use a more coarse file, you can do that. If you have more debulking to do, I've definitely done that for a long time until I recently made this switch. Alternatively, you can use the 100 over 180 grit hand file for this step as well, but the 80 grit hand file is definitely going to give you a more crisp shape. So I like to use this against the sidewalls and under the sidewalls as well. When I file under the sidewalls, I'm making sure to file parallel and making sure not to file into the actual side sidewall of the natural nail or creating a notch, and it just helps remove any excess product and make sure that everything is nice and neat, even from underneath as well. That also affects the aesthetics of the nail. Then I will use it against the sidewalls. This is when you really start to see that perfect stiletto shape come together. So if you feel like the sidewalls, like the actual sides of the nail against them, are looking bulky or they're not coming down in a straight line, this is when you can go ahead and refine that, and you can also make the free edge thinner to your liking. You can see the difference here with the thumb. Now that I filed the sides, it definitely has a more crisp shape. I always like to start with under the sidewalls first versus starting against the sidewalls, because a lot of times there is product under the nail that we think is creating bulk from the sides, and we can end up over filing on top of the sides of the nails, if that makes sense, when there's actually product underneath that we need to file. So if I make sure everything is nice and clean underneath, then when I go to file against the actual sides of the nail, I know that what I'm filing visually based on is what actually needs to be filed in that area. I'm trying to explain as clearly as I can, but if you follow what I'm doing visually as well, it should hopefully make sense. You can see here with the pointer, I have angled my file a lot because I'm really trying to make the sides more narrowed and tapered coming down to the free edge. The stiletto shape is basically supposed to be a perfect triangle with a sharp point, so that's what I'm aiming for. When I am focusing on that bottom part of the nail, I'm really not putting a lot of pressure at the top. I don't want to touch the actual sidewalls, especially where the natural nail meets the nail tip. I don't want to file into those sidewalls or narrow out that area too much, so I will just focus on the actual like bottom third of the nail. Also continue to use the same technique of using my thumb to help stabilize as I file. Sometimes if there are a few areas that I feel like still need to be filed down a little bit on the surface of the nail, I will use the 80/80 grit hand file for that. Why I really emphasize still like visually inspecting your nails and seeing where things need to be filed more or less, even when you are following a certain order of steps or routine. Finally, we are going to smooth everything out. This gives it a really polished look and removes any scratches from filing. I'm using the same very fine grit 240 grit sanding band at a pretty low speed, about 7 to 8 RPMs. You can also use it around the cuticle area if there's anything left there that you want to clean up. But for me personally, I'm not using this step to really debulk or remove any product. Really, I'm just looking to smooth everything out for the most part, go over it fully once so that any scratches are removed. This is what gives us a really smooth surface for nail art. Alternatively, you can also use a buffer along the nails, or if you want an extra smooth polished finish, I actually like to do both. So after that, I will still apply cuticle oil and buff with it. Sanding band itself works really great for smoothing everything out, but I feel like this especially gives you that really polished, extra smooth finish that makes it really easy to draw nail art over. It's also just so satisfying to do, and afterwards you can just wash your hands with soap and water and just cleanse, and you should have no problems with retention. And the stiletto nails were extremely sharp, so I am just rounding them out a little bit at the free edge. I do love a very sharp stiletto, but I've also put so many holes in my clothes from them. You can also leave this as is. Honestly, sometimes once you add gel polish and nail art, they kind of flatten out a little bit themselves, or you can round them out at the end. So up to you, whichever way you want to do it. But now it's time for the fun part. I mean, for me, shaping is fun and the rest of the process, but nail art is obviously fun in its own way. We are starting off with this solid red color called Seventh House. This is an art gel from my brand, and like the nails you can see on my left hand, which are the Brazil inspired nails, we are going to do the same flat horizontal Frenchies. These are so fun to do, and they're pretty easy. You're just going to draw a straight line, and then I'm using our art gel brush to fill in the free edge. It's just so satisfying to do, and painting with the art gels is so fun because they have a thicker consistency, but they still stay in place really well. And once we have fully cured that, I am going to be layering another one of our art gels over it, which is Eternal Eclipse. It's a red glitter. You could just go in with the Eternal Eclipse itself, but with the solid red base, you don't have to do a second layer. I think it just makes the sparkle in it pop even more. This color is one of my go-tos for Valentine's Day, but I also use it for Halloween nails. It's really great year-round, and I'm going in with that same 20mm brush. So in general, when painting with your non-dominant hand, I would recommend using a longer liner brush where you can, because it's just going to be a lot more stable with the longer hairs and your hands won't shake as much. Rather than using a liner brush to fill in the free edge of the Frenchie, using a brush like our art gel brush makes it super easy to fill in that free edge, even if you don't feel as confident using your opposite hand to paint. Tip is using a very thin layer of top coat that's fully cured in between steps when you are doing intricate nail art. We're going to be drawing some stars, so this helps ensure that smooth surface is really locked in and that my nail art brush is pretty much gliding along the surface. Painting stars can definitely feel a little intimidating with your opposite hand, but I am using that longer liner brush, which really helps. And I'm also just looking to get the foundation of the star in there. I'm not looking for it to be perfect just yet. Once you get the basic outline in there, you will feel a lot more confident. You can fill it in, and then we will go back and refine the edges to make them as crisp as we can. To a 12mm brush when I'm filling in the center of the star, just because the longer liner brush, it is really great for the actual lines, but it can be a little bit too bendy when I'm filling in the center of the nail art. Now I'm going back and refining those lines, and I feel a lot more confident doing so because the basic outline is in there. And with stars and just painting in general, you just want to be mindful of pressure. So to get those sharp points with the stars, you want to make sure you're using the very tip of your brush and really not applying a lot of pressure when you're coming to a point. It's very faint. It's almost like you're not even applying any pressure at all. If you press too hard coming down at the edge, that will create a thicker line and you won't get that sharp point. Also, don't be so hard on yourself when you are painting with your opposite hand, and also don't underestimate what you can paint. A lot of times I would try to shy away from more complicated nail art with my opposite hand, or just do like signs that don't require hand painting, but you'd be surprised what you can do when you actually give yourself a chance. And you will also be surprised that most of the time you probably don't even realize that you're painting with your opposite hand once you get into the flow of the set. But once we've got the outline down, the rest is pretty much just coloring it in. We are just going to paint it with a basic yellow gel polish, and once that's cured, I'm going in and adding shading with a shorter brush. I'm using our Golden Hour Art Glass gel. If you watched my Brazil World Cup video, you will see a lot of the techniques are the same that I used for that set as well. I love using our jelly and art glass colors to add easy dimension. This color Golden Hour helps add a little bit of warmth to that yellow that we've used for the base of the stars. And also the other reason I outlined with white is just because it's easier for me. Then we don't have to go in with 2 layers of yellow, but I'm just finishing off with some neon yellow highlights around the edges before top coating. I am using our new top coat, which is coming soon. It'll be, I don't know which launch it's going to be actually. It could be Halloween, it could be Christmas, I could do it separately, but the top coat's on the way and I really love it. I've been using it a lot and it's very strong but still really shiny, and it has a little bit of a thicker consistency, which I really love. But now we're continuing on with the Frenchie. So another thing that really helps, like we did with the stars, is just doing the white base for the French tip, especially when we are painting yellow over it. Like I said, then I don't have to do 2 layers of the yellow. I feel like it looks less streaky and it just helps the color look even brighter against the base. This is a technique you can use with any sort of nail art actually. Once that's cured, I am doing a little bit of an aura design, so I'm using this bright blue here, and once I blend it out, it's actually going to look a little tealish and yellow, which matches the design that we're doing. This is based on the Colombia away jersey that they had for this past season, and I really love this jersey. It's actually, I think, one of my favorite jerseys I saw out of the team's jerseys that I did see, but it has like a really fun teal color scheme and design with like some neon elements, so I just recreated that kind of in a simple way and basically did these kind of DIY, it almost looks like tiger stripes, but you're just using your brush at the center and then bringing it out to the sides. And then I added some yellow and neon to that as well. And then to make the blue pop a little more, I'm using another one of our art glass gels, Glass Atrium, and then using that ever so slightly. As you can see, it adds a little bit of depth and dimension to the blue and just makes it a little bit more of a deep color like we used Golden Hour for. And then I just went ahead and top coated it. And I also like to do a final file after I top coat. This is very light and it does not affect retention. I've never had issues with chipping or anything, so it's a great way to just redefine that shape as needed after you've added layers of gel polish and top coat. I am going to continue with the horizontal Frenchies. I was just lining up and trying to make sure they match where the Frenchies start with the other nails, and I am using a white base for this as well. I use this technique with the Brazil nails as well, and I use it mostly when I am doing a yellow underneath. It just makes it pop a little bit more, then I don't have to do a second coat, and it definitely helps, especially when you're using your non-dominant hand. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with the Colombia flag, but I ended up doing the stripes in this way where I color blocked out another section of white and then I painted the red and the blue in between. The key with the flag is that the yellow takes up a half and then the blue and the red take up the other half and are split between that, so just try to get those proportions correct. But I still wanted to do the flag in a way that felt cute and kind of maximal and had some embellishments and details, so I'm taking these gold caviar beads. There's no flat side to these, they are completely round, so they can be a little bit hard to pick up, and I'm going to get the smallest ones out of here. And actually a magnet is the easiest way to pick them up. If you drop them, just get a magnet or if you have a bunch you want to grab, just use a small magnet and it really helps. I'm going to do this between the different colors as a border, so I've just used a liner brush to lay down a little bit of rhinestone glue, and then I'm using the tweezers to the best of my ability to lay the caviar beads next to each other. This part is pretty tedious, so I would recommend doing one section at a time and flash curing. The caviar beads also have a little bit of weight to them, and I think it is because of the shape, because they're completely round, so it is nice to do them like maybe half of one section and then half of the other, just so you don't have to worry about them moving around. The easiest way that I found to do this was actually to lay down a couple of the beads. Don't worry about them being completely lined up, have them in the general area, and then make sure they're all lined up at the very end together like I did there. It makes it easier versus going back and fixing one at a time. And that's it for that design. It was a really easy way to spruce it up a little bit, and then I top coated between each section. I did not top coat over the caviar beads. Now we're going to do a summer inspired palm tree design. This probably is the most complicated out of all the designs, and we're also going to do a nail piercing. So I've laid down a yellow base and I'm doing an orange aura over that to create a sunset gradient in the background, and the yellow and orange combo really works well for that, especially as an aura design, and honestly the sponge works great. Now I'm taking a dark blue and I'm starting to draw the palm tree from the corner. Palm trees are actually pretty simple once you get the hang of it. The key is not worrying about them looking perfect. You want to draw the arch for the top of the palm tree leaf, and then the actual pieces of it, I should know the terminology, are basically just these random lines. So I just kind of flick out from the center and follow that general shape and make them more pointed once I get towards the end to really emphasize it. And even with your non-dominant hand, I promise it's not that bad. You're pretty much just doing this motion back and forth, and I haven't cured the gel, so if I want to extend everything out further and create a little bit more detail, it's pretty easy to do with the gel uncured and then cured at the end. So the bottom leaves will be bigger, and then as we go around the palm tree, we will continue to make them with that same curved direction going all around, and then gradually going towards the other side, and then just make them smaller and bigger as you can see. The top one I did a little bit smaller, and then this one at the center, you can see the curve is starting to go the other way, and I'm making the leaves a little bit smaller as well, and then I just mirrored that on the other side. It's a little hard to see, but I did add some glass atrium just to add a little bit more color in some areas, and then I'm also going to take a white and use that to add some detail as well, but I am going to mix the white with the blue to create a lighter color that's in between. This creates a little bit of highlight and dimension on the different leaves because the color is so dark, but it does it in a way that matches really well. If we were to go in with just a plain white, it might be too much of a stark contrast, so sometimes I will mix the color that's in between to do highlights like this. I do really love this dark blue color. It matches and complements the blue we used for the third nail, and also it really adds to the sunset vibe with the bright background and the silhouette of the palm tree being darker. Now we are going to do some nail piercing, so I'm taking a cuticle bit and I'm using this at a pretty high speed, but before I did that, I kind of marked out where it would be before drilling further into have these random circular pieces that are meant for jewelry, I think, but you can use them for nail piercing. So I took the smallest ones, and because I have both nails done on both hands, it was easier to open them up with like 2 pieces of these pliers. You just want to insert them into the hole that you've made and then tighten them at the bottom. But I would say actually do your top coat before you do the piercings, otherwise the top coat can get on the piercings and kind of like leave residue once it's cured. I did a chrome heart set, that's going to be my next video, and I did more nail piercings in that with this new technique, so I'll re-show you again, but for the most part this is the process you would follow. And it should go without saying, but be careful with the nail piercings. You do not, I repeat, do not do those on your natural nail, only do them on extensions or press-ons, basically a fake nail, and be very careful using your drill bit and all the tools and stuff. So for the last nail, we are going to do a chrome design, so I've used that same red for a French tip, and now I'm mixing some black with some non-wipe top coat. It just helps the chrome stick better and also makes it so that the chrome turns out shiny. And I am drawing the World Cup trophy, so I drew a circle at the top, and while that's uncured, I'm bringing that down, starting to drag that down and into a more narrow shape for the middle portion of the trophy. Basically, you don't want to cure the design until it is done, and like the entire design is done. You can't flash cure in between. You can cure in between when you're doing different chrome layers, which I will show you. Take your time with this step. If you mess up and some of the black gel gets elsewhere and you don't clean it up properly, the chrome will stick there sometimes, so I try to be very careful during this step. So I just drew the base of the trophy, and then once that was to my liking, I cured for about 20 to 30 seconds and had my chrome powder immediately ready to go. I'm using a gold chrome powder from Amazon. I just have this variety pack that I got. The nail art tools that I use from Amazon I will have linked below. You can find all of them in my storefront, and once I've cured for about 20 to 30 seconds, seconds. I'm using this applicator to apply the chrome, and then I will use a makeup sponge to dust off the excess. Back and cure the design fully, and then I go back and I'm going to build up the chrome layer. So this is what I meant by you can cure in between, but it's once you've done a certain layer and you plan to add more 3D structure, designs, whatever you want to call it. You're basically building up the design. So now I'm building up these sides of the trophy. So I'm just adding these 2 lines at the center, cured again, applied the chrome, fully cured that, and then dusting that off, and then I'm going to add 1 more layer at the center. So this is the process that you would use when you are doing multi-dimensional chrome designs that have different layers. You basically do it 1 piece at a time, and I'll have a more in-depth tutorial on this in my next tutorial, which is the chrome hearts one that I mentioned, because that entire design is chrome. You can also use the sponge to apply the chrome, but I find when the designs are more 3D, the eyeshadow applicator works better just because you can apply more pressure, but I still like to use the sponge to clean up the excess powder because it really gets all the little pieces off. Like the design needed a little bit of yellow and more detail, so I'm just doing this polka dot border around the sides before top coating everything together. But that is the last nail for this set, and I really enjoy doing this set, and I'm glad that I also pushed myself a little bit to do a little bit more complex nail art with my opposite hand, in the sense that, you know, I'm not just doing charms or designs that don't require actually painting with my brush. So if I can do it, you can do it. And also, I've just been really loving the summer sets. Usually I'm like always in the spooky fall mood, and I am looking forward to it, but I'm also really going to miss the summer designs. If you are interested in purchasing the press-on version of this design made with gel products, you can find that on my website along with other custom designs. And thank you so much again for watching. Please enjoy these last few clips and videos, and I will see you in my next long form video.